When the Holy Torah was given to Israel, not all of it was written down. A large portion of the Torah was taught and remembered by heart. This section is called the Torah Sheba'al Peh, or the spoken Torah. The Torah Sheba'al Peh came into being when Moshe Rabbeinu heard the commandments, guidelines, and rules directly from Hashem. He taught them to his student Yehoshua. Yehoshua taught them to the Zekanim. The Zekanim were the elders and the leaders of Israel in the days before kings ruled the people. The elders passed the Torah Sheba'al Peh on to the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im were the prophets who guided Israel during the time when kings ruled the people. The Nevi'im remembered and taught the spoken Torah to Israel during the time of the first Beit HaMikdash and also after its destruction. The prophets passed the Torah Sheba'al Peh on to the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, a group of 120 sages who led the Jewish people when they returned to the land of Israel from their exile in Babylon. Most of the people who returned spoke the language of Babylon called Aramaic. Hebrew is the original holy language of the Torah, but the sages used both Hebrew and Aramaic when speaking. The great tradition of Torah Sheba'al Peh kept the Torah alive for all generations. The Torah Sheba'al Peh helps us understand the written Torah and guides us in doing the commandments as Hashem wants us to. After the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, the task of teaching and leading the Jewish people moved to the Zugot. Zugot means pairs. In those days, there were always two great teachers who guided the Torah sages and led the people. The gathering of these Torah sages was called the Sanhedrin. The first leader of the Sanhedrin was called the Nasi, which means high up or president. He was something like a king because it was his job to help the Jewish people live according to the Torah with love and peace. The second leader was called the Av Bet Din, which means head of the court of law. His job was to help the sages during their discussions and make sure that proper decisions were reached. Over the next 250 years, there were 5 Zugot who led the Jewish people. The last of the Zugot were Hillel and Shammai. Hillel was Nasi, and since he was from the family of King David, he began a chain of Torah leaders that lasted for many years. The students of Hillel and Shammai began to have many arguments. The sages believed that everybody's Torah thoughts and opinions were important to remember and understand. So, the students of Hillel and Shammai remembered all the words of all the sages, even when there was an argument. They also made new rules to protect the Torah and help the Jewish people stay connected to Hashem. Over time, the Torah Sheba'al Peh grew and grew. Sadly, the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and the Jewish people suffered under Roman rule. That did not stop the sages from their holy work. They continued teaching Torah laws, explaining the mitzvot, thinking and talking and arguing about how Hashem's will should be done. The sages in the days after the Zugot are called Tanaim. The word Tana means repeater in Aramaic. Even though they were very wise, the Tanaim always felt that they were just repeating the Torah Sheba'al Peh. The period of the Tanaim lasted for 5 generations. Over time, Torah Sheba'al Peh grew very large. People began to have trouble remembering everything. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who was one of the presidents from the family of Hillel, knew what to do. He gathered the teachings of the Tanaim and made them into small bits of Torah. These bits are called Mishnayot. Each bit is called a Mishnah. The word Mishnah comes from the Hebrew word shana, which means repeat. Mishnayot were repeated over and over until they were remembered very well. The whole collection of bits is called the Mishnah. Actually, Torah Sheba'al Peh should not be written down. However, as time went on, it became more and more difficult for people to remember the Mishnah. The sages realized that if the Mishnah was not written down, it would be forgotten. Therefore, the Mishnah was eventually put into writing. At the same time that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was collecting and arranging the Mishnah, other sages were collecting bits of Torah Sheba'al Peh on their own. These bits are called Baraitot. A single bit is called a Baraita. In Aramaic, the word Birah means outside. Since Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi did not put these bits into the Mishnah, they are called Baraitot, which means outsiders. The Baraitot are outside the Mishnah. The Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was accepted by everyone. All of the sages studied it. The Mishnah was finished, so no one was allowed to make any changes to it. The Mishnayot were very compact. Even the sages had to work very hard to understand them completely. The 7 generations of sages who came after the Tanaim are called Amoraim, meaning speakers or explainers. A single one of these sages is called an Amora. The Amoraim explained the Mishnayot. Sometimes, when it looked like one Mishnah didn't fit with another Mishnah, they showed that the 2 Mishnayot are really the same. They also showed how the Mishnayot are based upon the written Torah, and they looked at the Mishnayot and the Braitot to see if they were the same or different. The discussions of the Amoraim continued for hundreds of years. The discussions are called sugyot. Each discussion is called a sugya. The whole collection of sugyot is called the Gemara, which means the teaching or the tradition in Aramaic. Like the Mishnah, the discussions of the Gemara were collected, arranged, and written. Unlike the Mishnah, which is in Hebrew, the Gemara is in Aramaic. The Mishnah and the Gemara, when together, are called the Talmud. This means the teaching in Hebrew. Usually, people call a book of the Talmud a Gemara, even though it has Mishnayot in it too. But the Mishnayot are short, while the Sugyot of the Gemara are much longer. Since a book of the Talmud is mostly full of Sugyot, it will usually be called a Gemara. Sometimes you might hear someone say, the Gemara says this, or the Gemara says that. This is usually a short way of saying, one of the Amoraim in the Gemara says this, or one of the Amoraim in the Gemara says that. From the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash and on through the days of the Tanaim and Amoraim, there was a great Jewish community in Babylon. There were great schools of Torah learning, called yeshivot in Babylon, just as in the land of Israel. Each one of these schools was called a yeshiva. No matter where Jews go, they still set up yeshivot where they study the Talmud. If you live in a large Jewish community, there is probably a yeshiva in your neighborhood. Back in the days of the Amoraim, there were wise Amoraim in the yeshivot of the land of Israel. There were also wise Amoraim in the yeshivot of Babylon. The discussions of the Amoraim of the land of Israel are found in the Talmud Yerushalmi, meaning the Jerusalem Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud wasn't really composed in Jerusalem. The Romans had completely destroyed Jerusalem. No Jews were there. The yeshivot of the land of Israel were in the northern part of the country. Still, the Amoraim of the land of Israel called their Talmud the Jerusalem Talmud because they loved Hashem's holy city and always hoped it could be soon restored. Then they would study their Talmud in Jerusalem, the true heart of the Jewish people. Roman rule made life difficult for the Jews in the land of Israel. They worked as quickly as possible to record their discussions. Therefore, the Jerusalem Talmud is brief, but deep and difficult to understand. The discussions of the Amoraim of Babylon are found in the Talmud Bavli, meaning the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Amoraim had more peace of mind. Their discussions took more time and were clearer. As time went on, many Amoraim from the land of Israel traveled to Babylon, bringing with them much of the Torah of the land of Israel. This was also put in the Babylonian Talmud. So, when you study the Babylonian Talmud, you are actually studying the words of the Amoraim of Babylon and also the words of the Amoraim of the land of Israel. Our practice of Jewish law is based upon the Babylonian Talmud. When Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi composed the Mishnah, he divided the Mishnayot into groups. There are 6 groups. The groups are called Sidarim, which means orders in Hebrew. A single group is called a Seder. The groups are called Sidarim because the Mishnayot in each group follow one another in a logical order. It's good to know about the Sidarim of the Mishnah. Recognizing the Sidarim is like having a map to help you find your way through the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Sometimes, instead of saying the Mishnah, we say the Shisha Sidarim, meaning the 6 orders. We also say the Shas for short. Since the Talmud has both Mishnah and Gemara, it is also called the Shas. Here are the Sidarim of the Mishnah. Zeraim. This means seeds in Hebrew. These Mishnayot are not just about seeds. They explain the Torah laws about growing food in the land of Israel and in other places. These Mishnayot talk about the holiness of the land of Israel. They teach you to share your food with others. They teach you not to mix different kinds of plants when you plant them. Since we say blessings on the food we grow, the laws of the blessings and other prayers are in Seder Zeraim too. Moed. This means times. These Mishnayot talk about the laws of Shabbat, holidays, and fast days. Nashim. This means women. These Mishnayot talk about the laws of marriage and divorce. Nezikin. This means damages. These Mishnayot talk about the laws of money and other valuable things that belong to a person. The Torah wants you to be careful not to harm other people or their things. That's why this Seder is called damages. Kedoshim. This means holy things. These Mishnayot talk about the sacrifices offered in the Beit HaMikdash. The laws of keeping kosher are also found in this Seder, because when we keep kosher, it makes us holy too. Taharot. This means pure things. These Mishnayot talk about how to become spiritually clean and pure. Back when we had a Beit HaMikdash, it was important to be spiritually clean and pure, so we could go there. Even now you can become more spiritually clean and pure if you dip yourself in a special pool of water called a mikveh. Just be sure that you really want to be closer to Hashem when you do this. The laws of how to wash your hands before you eat bread are also found there. Each of the 6 Siddharim is made up of units called Masechtot. Each one of these units is called a Masechet. Originally, the word Masechet meant woven in Hebrew. The units are called Masechtot because the Mishnayot in each Masechet are connected and attached to each other like threads in a piece of cloth. Each Masechet has a subject that it teaches. A Masechet is made up of chapters called Perakim in Hebrew. One chapter is called a Perek. A Perek is made up of Mishnayot. Each Masechet has a name. This name is connected to the subject the Masechet talks about. Each Perek has a name too. The name of a Perek is not like the name of a Masechet. The name of a Perek is made out of the first words of the Perek. Let's see how this works. Let's look at Seder Zeraim, the first order of the Mishnah. The first Masechet in Zeraim is called Brachot, which means blessings. This Masechet talks about the blessings and prayers we say every day. The first Perek of Masechet Brachot is called Perek Me'ematai. Now, the word Me'ematai means from when. This might sound like a strange name for a chapter, but it's not really so strange. The chapter is called Me'ematai because it begins with the word Me'ematai. The Mishnah begins with the question, from when does a person read the Shema in the evening? Just like the entire Mishnah is called the Shas, so too the entire Talmud is also called the Shas. Each volume of the Talmud has the Mishnah and Gemara of one Masechet. For hundreds of years after it was composed, the Shas was copied by hand. If you wanted to get the Shas, you had to find someone who had a set, borrow it, and take it to a scribe who would copy it for you. This was difficult and expensive, but the Jewish people loved the Torah, so they were always willing to do whatever it takes to have a set of the Shas. When the printing press was invented, Jews began to print many holy Sfarim. Some Masechtot of the Shas were printed by the Sansino family in Italy about 500 years ago. They had the idea of printing the commentaries of Rashi and the Tosafot right on the same page as the Talmud itself. That's how it's done even today. Later on, the whole Shas was printed for the first time in Venice, Italy. A non-Jew called Daniel Bomberg loved the Jews and the Torah. He gave a great deal of money to a group of Torah scholars so that they could work on printing a beautiful Shas. About 130 years ago, the Shas was printed by the Ram family in Vilna, a city in Lithuania. Nowadays, every Shas has exactly the same pages as the Vilna Shas which the Ram family printed. This means that everyone who studies Gemara anywhere in the world sees the same pages. So, if you have a question about a line of Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia on page 21, you'll be able to send your question to a rabbi on the other side of the world. He will be able to take out his Masechet Bava Metzia, look up page 21, and see exactly what line you're talking about. Let's look at the front cover of the Sefer. Here you see the words Talmud Bavli Masechet Bava Metzia. You understand that this Sefer is one Masechet of the Mishnah and the Gemara as it was studied in the Babylonian yeshivot. The name of the Masechet is Bava Metzia. Now open the Sefer. Look, here is a place for you to write your name. You should do this so that if you should ever lose your Gemara, a fellow Jew will be able to fulfill the mitzvah of returning your lost Gemara to you. Isn't it amazing? Almost all Jewish children all over the world begin studying the Talmud with the sugyot that talk about the mitzvah of returning a lost thing. Those sugyot are right here in Masechet Bava Metzia. Most people write the Hebrew letters Lamed, He, Vav before they write their names in a sefer. These letters stand for the Hebrew words LaHashem Haaretz Umlo'ah. This means, to Hashem belongs the earth and everything in it. We must remember that Hashem is the true owner of everything. When a Jew says, "This is mine," he actually means this belongs to Hashem, and Hashem lets me have it. Look here. Sometimes printers of the Talmud put two special prayers on the inside of the front cover of your sefer. If you don't see the prayers on the inside of the cover, you might find it here on the front flap. You should say the first prayer before you learn it. You should say the second prayer when you stop. According to the Mishnah in Masechet Brachot, a Tana called Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana first had the idea of saying a little prayer when he entered the yeshiva and when he left. The other sages asked him, "What are these prayers?" He answered, "When I go in, I pray that no mistake should happen because of me. And when I leave, I thank Hashem for my portion in the Torah." The Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Daf Kafchet Amud Bet, teaches us a braita which explains exactly how we should pray when we begin to learn and when we are finished learning. The first prayer says, "May it be your will before you, Hashem my God, that no mistake should happen through me, and that I should not stumble in a matter of Torah law, and that my friends will be happy with me, and that I should not say about something clean that it is unclean, or of something unclean that it is clean. Nor should my friends stumble in a matter of Torah law, and I will be happy with them." The holy Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, a great Torah sage who lived about 450 years ago, used to say two verses at the end of the first prayer. The first is from the wisdom of Shlomo HaMelech in the book of Mishlei. It says, "For Hashem will give wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding." The second verse is from the book of Tehillim. It says, "Uncover my eyes, and I will see wonders from your Torah." Our custom is to say these two verses at the end of the first prayer. The second prayer says, "I give thanks to you, Hashem my God, that you placed my portion with those who sit in study halls, and that you did not place my portion with those who sit on the street corners. For I wake up early, and they wake up early. I wake up early for words of Torah, and they wake up early for empty words. I work hard, and they work hard. I work hard and get reward.
Wow.
They work hard and do not receive reward. I run, and they run. I run to life in the world to come, and they run to the pit of destruction." In some printings of the Talmud, you may find an extra prayer. This prayer was mentioned by a great Torah sage called Rabbi David Halevi, who lived about 350 years ago. But the prayers that we translated for you are special because they are mentioned in the Gemara itself. This page is called the Daf HaSha'ar. Daf means page in Hebrew, and Sha'ar means gate. So, the Daf HaSha'ar is the gate page. Here is a picture of a beautiful gate. When you pass through this gate, It will take you into the Talmud. This is supposed to remind you of the verse from Tehillim. This is the gate to Hashem. Tzaddikim will enter it. You may notice that the gate is in part closed off with a fence. This shows you that not everyone actually gets through the gate. Not everyone who tries to learn Gemara really understands it. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It depends on why you learn. If you learn because you want to get close to Hashem, you will succeed. If you study for other reasons, like being famous, you may not succeed. Sitting on top of the gate, you will find two lions. If you look closely, you'll notice that the one on the right is smiling, while the one on the left is sad. The reason for this is, after you have learned, you might feel happy because of how much you've accomplished. On the other hand, you might also feel sad when you think about how much there is yet to learn. But if you love Hashem, you will always be happy when you tried your best. Learning Gemara is not a race. It's about loving Hashem and being loved back. So don't worry about the lions. Walk right by them. In the center of the gate, you will find the name of the Masechet. Here we are looking at Masechet Bava Metzia. Now let's turn another page. This page is called the Daf HaTochen, which means the What's in It page. This page gives you all the information about the commentaries included with the Gemara. Here we have the first page. You will notice that the first word is put in a box. The word is like a gem in a treasure chest. This reminds you how to study the Talmud. Each word was carefully chosen. Each word needs to be understood clearly so it shines like a diamond. Look in the upper left-hand corner of the page. Do you see the letter Bet? This letter Bet means the number 2. This is page 2. The Talmud always starts with page 2 because page 1 of the Talmud needs to be in your heart before you begin to study. A person must have derech eretz. This means the way of the earth in Hebrew. Having derech eretz means knowing how to be kind and helpful to others. It means knowing how to care and share. It means having a good heart. If the first page of Derech Eretz is written in your heart, then you can understand the Gemara properly. That is why the Mishnah says, Derech Eretz comes before Torah. Now turn to the other side of this first page. Did you notice? There is no letter Gimel at the top. The other side of page 2 is not page 3. Page 3 is over there. This is just the other side of page 2. Page 2 in the Talmud has 2 sides. One page of Talmud which has 2 sides is called a daf. Each daf is numbered according to the letters of the alphabet. One side of a daf is called an amud. The first side is always called Amud Aleph. The second one is always called Amud Bet. So this page is called Daf Bet Amud Aleph. This page is called Daf Bet Amud Bet. Sometimes in the commentaries you might find some letters like this. This means Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet. The letters are the number of the daf, and the 2 dots mean Amud Bet. This is the same as saying page 21, second side. When Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi set up Seder Nezikin, He decided that the first Masechet would talk about all the problems people have when they fight over money or other things. People can have so many fights. One person might lend his friend money and the friend might not pay him back. Someone else might give a friend a gift and then change his mind and want it back. Someone might also lend his neighbor an animal to work with, but the animal dies while the neighbor is using it. So many arguments, so many fights. When people have these fights, the Torah commands them to go to a group of Torah sages called a Beit Din. This means house of law in Hebrew. A Beit Din is supposed to use the Torah's laws to decide who is right and who is wrong. The fights happen because some people make others lose their money or things. A loss that someone causes another person is called damage, or nezek in Hebrew. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi called this Masechet Nezikin. He put it right at the beginning of Seder Nezikin. Sadly, there are so many reasons that people have for fighting. This Masechet became very large, 30 whole parakim. It was very difficult to review all 30 parakim at once, so it was decided to break Masechet Nezikin down into 3 smaller Masechtot. Since the Beit Din used to sit near the city gate, each of these 3 Masechtot is called a gate. In Aramaic, a gate is called a bava. The first is called bava kama. This means the first gate in Aramaic. The second was called bava metzia. This means the middle gate in Aramaic. The last is called bava batra. This means the last gate in Aramaic. You will be studying the second perek of Masechet Bava Metzia. This perek is called Perek Elu Metziot. It talks about what to do when someone loses something and someone else finds it. The name of the perek is taken from its opening phrase, which means, these are the fines that he is allowed to keep. This is the page we are going to study in the upcoming CD. It is called Masechet Bava Metzia, Daf Kaf Aleph, Amud Aleph. Here is the beginning of the second chapter. It is called Perek Elu Metziot. The name of the perek is taken from its first words, Elu Metziot. They mean these are the fines. This Mishnah begins with a list of things that can be kept by the finder if they were lost by the owners. The big letters spell out the phrase Hadran alach shnaim ochazim. They are not related to the perek we are learning, so let's just move on, okay? This perek begins with a Mishnah. At the end of the Mishnah, the letters Gimel, Mem appear. This stands for the word Gemara. This means that what you read up until this point is a Mishnah, the words of the Tanaim. After this point, you will be reading Gemara, the words of the Amoraim. Later on, when the Gemara's discussion of this Mishnah is complete, the letters Mem, Tav, Nun, Yud will appear. This stands for the Aramaic words Matnita, which means Mishnah. This means that a new Mishnah is about to follow. The Mishnah and Gemara are always printed in regular Hebrew letters called square letters. On the inside margin is Rashi's commentary. Rashi is short for Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. He lived in France about 900 years ago. Rashi learned from his teacher's explanations on all the Masechtot of the Gemara. He wrote his commentary so that none of these explanations would be forgotten. It is impossible to study Gemara without using Rashi's commentary. Rashi invented the idea of using a short bit from the Gemara as the lead phrase for his comments. That way, Rashi's explanation flows along with the Gemara's discussion, giving more information where needed and explaining difficult concepts or words. This is the lead phrase. This is Rashi's comment. Rashi originally wrote his commentaries down in notebooks, which were copied by his students. A notebook is called a kuntris in Aramaic, so Rashi's commentary is often called the kuntris. Each comment by Rashi can be identified by its lead phrase or dibur hamatchil. On the outside margin, you will find the Tosafot. Tosafot means additions. The Tosafot are additional explanations to the Gemara. Unlike Rashi's commentary, which flows along with the Gemara's discussion, the Tosafot ask questions about the Gemara and give answers. The Tosafot were composed by many sages who lived right after the time of Rashi. Some were even his son-in-laws and grandchildren. Even though these sages were close to Rashi, they didn't always agree with him. Many times, the Tosafot argue with Rashi. The authors of the Tosafot also tried to connect all the different sugyot. They would look for all the places in the Shas where a certain topic is discussed, and they would show how these sugyot all fit together. Learning Tosafot can be exciting, but before you try to study the Tosafot, you need to know and understand the Gemara and Rashi very well. Like Rashi's comments, each one of the Tosafot has its own lead phrase or dibur hamatchil. Rashi's commentary and the Tosafot are printed with a special style of letters. The printers did this so you could always tell the difference between the Gemara and the commentaries on the Gemara. These letters are called Rashi letters. There are many other interesting things you can discover on each page of the Talmud. Over the years, many scholars studied the Gemara. They saw that in many places the Gemara is connected to the Torah shebichtav. They saw that sometimes a sugya appears in many places in the Gemara. They saw that sometimes a sugya is connected to other sugyot in other places. What's more, as time went on, some Torah sages wrote svarim about how to do the mitzvot based on the sugyot of the Gemara. The proper way of keeping the mitzvot is called the halacha. Torah laws are called halachot. So the svarim that teach us how to do the mitzvot are called sifrei halachot. So the Torah shebichtav, the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the sifrei halachot are all connected in many ways. When you study Gemara, you will find links that will take you to verses in the Torah shebichtav, to other sugyot, or to the sifrei halachot. These links appear as little notes on the side of the page, and they are called hagahot. One little note is called a hagaha. When the sages studied the Talmud, they used to write little notes on the side of the pages to help them remember important things. Later on, printers of the Talmud put many of these notes onto the pages they printed. The greatest link maker of all time is Rabbi Yehoshua Boaz Baruch. He lived in Italy about 500 years ago. Let's take a look at the links he composed. Right between the Gemara and Rashi, or the Tosafot, you will often find little links. These links can lead you to another place in the Gemara for more information. Now take a look at the next staf. See that little link down at the bottom between the Gemara and the Tosafot? That link tells you where to find the verse of Torah shebichtav that the Gemara mentions here. These links are called Torah Or. Here on the inside margin, you will find a different set of links called Mesoret HaShas. The Masoret HaShas will lead you to many places in the Gemara, the Talmud Yerushalmi, Rashi's commentary, or the Tosafot. As you study the Gemara, you will often see little asterisks. Wherever you see one, you'll know that Rabbi Yehoshua Boaz has left you a link in the Masoret HaShas. If you follow it, it will lead you to other places for more information. Sometimes he will help by explaining things. Sometimes he will even correct a mistake that the copiers or printers accidentally put in the Gemara. On the far outside margin of the pages, you'll find even more links. These links are called Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah, and they lead to many places in the four important Sifrei Halachot: the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, the Sefer Mitzvot Hagadol, the Arba Turim, and the Shulchan Aruch. As you study the Gemara, you will often see little square font letters. Wherever you see a letter like this, you'll know that Rabbi Yehoshua Boaz has left you a link in the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah.